The left lose their minds over Roe v. Wade being overturned. Joe Biden targets the biggest oil area in the United States, and illegal immigration is still skyrocketing. All of that today here on The Bald Brad Show. Welcome to The Bald Brad Show. Folks, we have returned from our 4-day vacation, a much needed one because it was my first vacation in 10 years. I was out there in the Pacific Ocean, sipping on margaritas in a jacuzzi, living the good life, no cell phone, no news, no politics, no nothing. Then I get to the Port of Los Angeles 4 days later, I flip on my phone, and I gotta say, folks, what the hell happened? You got Roe v. Wade being overturned on Friday. Antifa and progressive left take to the streets over the weekend as well as Monday because Lord knows they don't work. Putting menstrual blood all over their bodies, twerking oddly enough, shouting a bunch of nonsense. Antifa's lighting the American flag on fire and going after Maryland Police Department. You got Whoopie Goldberg in The View shouting a bunch of nonsense, which I know is typical. You also have Lori Lightfoot of Chicago and Justin Trudeau of Canada putting in their 2 cents along with other politicians and celebrities. Joe Biden's targeting the largest oil-producing area in the United States while at the same time chauffeuring out his energy secretary, who's saying they're doing the complete opposite. So you got mixed signals coming from that administration, which is typical. And then you have Joe Biden basically performing amnesty, which is a crazy story we're going to get to at the end of the Bald Brad Show. But if you're a supporter of the show, or heck, you want to support a conservative and you're watching over at YouTube, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. And also leave us a comment on what you think about Roe v. Wade. Furthermore, if you're watching at Rumble, leave us a comment down below as well. And if you're listening over at Spotify, Apple, any of those podcast sources, support us by leaving a nice review or a 5-star would be greatly appreciated. Helping out here at the Bald Brad Show allows us to grow and inform new viewers with conservative thought and ideas. With that being said, we have Roe v. Wade being overturned on Friday, and rightfully so. Now, listening to the progressive left in the streets, as well as Democrats, and they're shouting a bunch of nonsense, which is typical. They have no clue on the history of Roe v. Wade, how the opinion got established, where those opinions came from, which was Griswold v. Connecticut, and even Griswold v. Connecticut had their opinions that was pre-established. All these things I want to talk about here before we get into the craziness of celebrities like The View hosts and all the shenanigans that they're saying. So we're going to do a short synopsis here, and then we're going to roll into the main news. Because I don't want us to be ignorant, just like the left are, shouting a bunch of crazy crap and not having these ideas fully formed and fully fledged. So with Griswold v. Connecticut, short synopsis is you had a executive director to be specific, of Planned Parenthood, working in conjunction with a doctor to prescribe birth control. And this was not allowed by the state. So as you'd imagine, they got in trouble, they got indicted, got arrested, all this stuff, and it went to the courts. The courts ruled, ended up going to the Supreme Court, and that's where we get Griswold v. Connecticut. Well, the Supreme Court ruled in a 7-2 decision that the law violated the rights to marital privacy. Justice William O. Douglas wrote for the majority and suggested, quote, the specific guarantees in the Bill of Rights have penumbras, and what they call these penumbras are shadows, formed by emanations from these guarantees that help give them life and substance. In layman terms, the Bill of Rights has a source that creates an umbrella effect and establishes the shadows where new rights can be discovered. Notice the source, or in other words, emanations, are unspecified by Douglas. Nowhere in his writings does he actually talk about how he got to that conclusion. He just made it out of whole cloth. And we're going to see that time and time again from Douglas, just creating things out of thin air. According to Douglas, these rights had always been there, unbeknownst to the framers, and eluded elected legislatures for 176 years. Within the shadow, Douglas argued that there was a zone of privacy that emanates from the First Amendment, Third Amendment, Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, Ninth Amendment, and 14th Amendment. So if that kind of went over your head, basically what Douglas did was he said, look, the Bill of Rights casts an umbrella. And from that umbrella, it gives off shadows. And within these shadows, you could find newly discovered rights that had, quote, always been there, but somehow, like I said, eluded the framers and the founders for like 176 years. Nobody had ever seen them before. You can't find them in the Constitution. You can't find abortion. You can't find the right or zone of privacy, but somehow they're there. He argued and would go on to say that the Third Amendment, which deals with the prohibition against quartering of soldiers in any house with consent in peacetime, could be absorbed by the so-called zone of privacy. The Fourth Amendment, which prohibits unreasonable searches and seizures, along with the Fifth Amendment, privilege against self-incrimination, was also attached. Somehow, this, quote, zone of privacy was transformed into the right of privacy by switching words, as you can imagine, from zone to right. 3 other justices utilized the 9th and 14th Amendments in their concurring opinions with Justice Douglas. The 9th Amendment states, quote, "The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people." Justice Arthur Goldberg used to argue this as that will allow the court to find the right of privacy or the fundamental right of marital privacy without actually having to find the specific constitutional amendment that says so. So again, the right to privacy as well as the fundamental right of marital privacy does not actually have to be specified verbatim in the Constitution for them or such people to have that right. Both justices, John Marshall Harlan II and Byron White, used the 14th Amendment to support the right of privacy is included in the Due Process Clause and has traditionally been protected by American society. If it seems like there's some mental gymnastics going on, that's because there was. Remember, Griswold v. Connecticut was about birth control, and somehow birth control is being attached to the ban against quartering soldiers in private homes. Moreover, what does Connecticut state's birth control have to do with unreasonable search and seizures? According to the court, this can all be found in the shadows of the Bill of Rights. The way the court sees it, the 9th Amendment grants the freedom to scour these shadows, to find rights that are not listed in the Constitution, and magically attach those newly found rights to pre-established rights. This is not how the law is intended to work. It has paved the way for justices to rule on a policy outcome that they like. Which is funny because they're saying Justice Thomas and others are doing the same thing today, that they're using their religious beliefs to enact certain laws, and that comes from the view which we'll see in a moment. These cases laid the groundwork for a case that would change our elected democracy forever. On January 22nd, 1973, the Supreme Court issued a 7-2 decision that the United States Constitution protects a woman's right to choose an abortion. Prior to Roe v. Wade, state legislatures decided what laws would govern the practice of abortion. This led to various states throughout the Union having different legislation around abortion. In 1969, a woman named Norma McCorvey was pregnant with her 3rd child. After deciding she no longer wanted to keep the child, she sought a place that would perform an abortion. At the time, Texas law did not allow the practice of abortion. Well, she was adamant about getting one, so McCorvey was referred to Linda Coffey and Sarah Weddington, who were looking to represent women seeking abortions. Her case made it all the way to the Supreme Court, but instead of using the name Norma McCorvey, she used Jane Roe. So that's how you get to that idea of who that was. Henry Wade was the district attorney of Dallas County at the time. The District Court of Texas ruled that the state's abortion law was illegal. The reasoning given by the state was it violated the constitutional right to privacy. Again, this right to privacy you're going to hear time and time again. Mind you, I'm a big advocate of privacy, but if it's not specified and you're just coming up with things, it needs to be written in there, which you can do. Just put it in there. The Supreme Court struck down the Texas law banning abortion. With this ruling, abortion becomes effectively legal across the nation. Furthermore, the court found that it was up to a woman during the first trimester if she wanted an abortion. During the second trimester, it would be left up to the governments to regulate abortion, but not ban it. This was to allow the protection of the mother that may have health concerns. In the 3rd trimester, if the fetus could survive on its own outside the womb, it should be protected by the state. This was the exception to the mother's health if it was in danger. All of this was a, quote, right to privacy protected by the 14th Amendment. In writing the opinion of the majority, Justice Harry Blackmun performed the same mental gymnastics as Justice Douglas did. During Griswold v. Connecticut, if you remember, Justice Douglas invented new rights from the shadows that emanated from the Bill of Rights. Justice Blackmun, took those invented rights and ruled that the Due Process Clause was included in the right of privacy. The 14th Amendment was not intended to create any new rights, but to secure all persons, notably including freed slaves, that their descendants, the right and liberty guaranteed by the Constitution, which contradicts what they were actually trying to put in place themselves. They construed the 14th Amendment to enact certain rights to privacy or right of privacy because of the Due Process Clause, but that's not what history showed us in terms of what was the creation of the 14th Amendment and what was the purpose of it. The court had created a right so large that itself had penumbras, meaning they basically established the right of privacy and made it so general and so broad that within itself created shadows that you could find newly found rights within that. The enlargement could encompass almost anything and everything that is performed outside the public view. It has the potential to include child abuse, possession of pornography, or using illicit drugs. The other issue is the court does not have the power to create, and this was one of the main problems with it. The Supreme Court exceeded its constitutional authority by establishing and creating law. Congress has the power to make law, not the judiciary. During Roe, the court literally acted as a legislature by creating the trimester framework in which states would have to abide. As seen through the history of abortion, humanity has been performing abortions for thousands of years. It was not as if the founders and framers were not cognizant of abortion. If they were, a zone of privacy or a right to privacy or a right to abortion, the framers would have included those in the Constitution. If this is a right that American society would like, we would elect politicians to pass an amendment in Congress that grants certain rights. The actions of the court negated our constitutional system for Roe. Under our system, most policy issues have been left up to elected officials. This puts the power in the hands of the people, not the government. In Roe v. Wade, the court decided it was no longer the people who had the authority. Anyone could scour the Constitution to find any sort of reference, right to an abortion, but will not find such right, let alone any word of abortion. The Roe decision has led many legal scholars, justices, and lawyers to create and criticize the decision. I mean, a vast swath of those that believe in the constitutional lawyers. Heck, even Black Mom's own clerk thought that he was wrong. Okay. So all these people have come out and said, look, it's just bad law. You could try to make an argument for it, but in terms of how they came to their opinions of construing and finding these within these shadows new rights that were never there in the first place, and again, somehow eluded over 176 years of legals, lawyers, the framers, the founders, is just mind-blowing. So that's how they got to the conclusion of Roe v. Wade, that you have all these rights that somehow just already pre-existed. And that's why ultimately it was overturned, because it was bad law. It created bad precedents. And that's what they're saying now, the left, going, oh, well, it already had been in the past there, so we should just go along with it. If anybody knows the Constitution, there's a lot of things that were put in place in the Constitution that were ultimately upended because they were dumb and stupid and shouldn't have been placed in the first half of our history at least. But that's stuff that they're not going to touch. So that was a brief history of what took place with Roe v. Wade. I encourage all of you to even go further in detail and see how Griswold v. Connecticut came to their decision, because what Douglas did was he took prior cases, multiple cases, and kind of entwined them all together to come to his conclusions. And then in Roe v. Wade, they took those entwinements, attached them basically in a nice lump sum to find these zone of rights or rights to privacy per marital rights, and then establish a more broader right from that for Roe v. Wade that just created bad law for everybody. And again, you had the Supreme Court acting as a legislature, which is not their job. So furthermore, this brings us to nice Whoopi Goldberg of The View and others reacting to the Dobbs decision that took place on Friday, losing their minds and saying just a bunch of just stupid stuff. So here is Whoopi Goldberg shouting to the skies a bunch of nonsense.
Nothing is precedent anymore.
Well, you better hope that they don't come for you, Clarence, and say you should not be married to your wife who happens to be white. Because they will move that. And you better hope that nobody says, well, you're not in the Constitution, you're back to being a quarter of a person. Because that's not going to work either.
Okay, so there's The View. Oh, it's going to go back to the 50s and all this stuff. You're not going to be able to be married to your wife because his wife is white, if you didn't know. And it's just, they say this nonsense, and then there's nobody around them, right? There's nobody on that panel that's going to sit there and actually question their thoughts, question the things that come out of their mouths. And I don't understand it, how they could just sit there and just say this stuff day in and day out, and there's people that just absorb this and go, oh, this is great. This is totally right. And they're taken as legitimate. Like, the stuff that they say is so insane, but there's people that just sit there and absorb it and go, oh, they're right. Rather than going, hey, you know what? Like, maybe there's some things in there that sound a little off. Like saying that, you're not going to be a whole person, that you're going to go back to 3/5 of a person, or that you're not going to be acknowledged as the husband of a person that's married to a white person because you're black. Like, these are just crazy thoughts that are just being spewed. And they're not just coming from just The View, but they're coming from other people. Now, before we get into those other people, you also have Sunny from The View talking about how certain religious people that are Americans are voting in favor of their religious views rather than what they should be doing in terms of the Supreme Court and following what was precedents before. So here's Sunny doing basically the same thing as Whoopi Goldberg was, saying a bunch of silly stuff.
I think our viewers know this. I don't believe in abortion at any time. I don't believe in any exception to it. I don't believe it. No,
even incest?
No, I don't. I don't. And that's considered very radical and for many people. And it's because I'm Catholic and that's my faith. And, the justices, there are 6 Catholics on the bench. And there will be 2 Protestants, because the newest Justice, Ketanji Brown Jackson, is Protestant, and there'll be 1 person of Jewish faith. And so this has always been a very difficult discussion for me. But what is not difficult for me is the fact that this is an activist Supreme Court, and they should not be deciding the law based on their faith.
So we'll pause it there, and there's more that she's about to say here in terms of guns and stuff. And again, it's literally nonsense. But she's making the claim that these justices created an opinion based on their faith. When we just went through the prior justices of 2 different cases, Supreme Court cases, again, there's more that even before that, to where they came up with all this crazy shenanigans that just made this stuff out of whole cloth, just out of thin air. And again, you have tons of lawyers that will come out, and constitutional lawyers, and also prior Supreme Court justices, and again, even known clerks of the Supreme Court justice who wrote the opinion of Roe v. Wade, going, yeah, this is bad law, this was terrible, doesn't make sense, you're not going to find abortion anywhere. You had even the Supreme Court justices prior that said, you're not going to find the word abortion anywhere, we just basically made it up, without actually them saying explicitly that they made it up. So they would use words like penumbras and emanations to describe how they made this stuff up. But according to Sunny and the Views, this all has to do with their religion and all this other stuff. Crazy.
And and it's just, and even though I agree with Alito on the sanctity of life, and he is clearly against abortion because he's had this
he's never had to have one, so he can make those kinds of
but none of them have. But the fact that he clearly is using his religion and wielding it as
how does that reconcile with RBG, though, who always was dissenting? She did not like the way Roe v. Wade was decided, but she was someone that saw the Constitution as a living document. She had a different interpretation, philosophically speaking, yet she felt legally that there was an argument there. So does this necessarily mean it's a religion?
Don't we have church, separation? Yes,
no, we don't anymore.
I mean, Clarence Thomas used to have a seance and have Thomas Jefferson there and Alexander Hamilton. Hello?
Yeah.
Do we still have a separation of church and state here as in the Constitution?
Yeah, I love that these same people that bash Thomas Jefferson and others, consistently calling them racist, all of a sudden want to talk and utilize their quotes, and all now they're buddy with them. Oh, we should call them up, and see what they think about all this. Now they're all cool with Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, all these people at the beginning of the foundation of this country. But when it goes against the grain, all of a sudden they want to attack them.
It's the First Amendment guarantee, and we don't seem to have that anymore.
We're in a theocracy.
Okay, and then you have her saying that we're in a theocracy. Alrighty, and again, I know I'm repeating myself, but nobody's going to go out against them and go, hey, well, what the hell did you just say? How does what you say make sense? Can you justify those words that just came out of your mouth? Again, Behar suggested that Justice Clarence Thomas ought to have a sense of contact both Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton. Hello, do we still have a separation of church and state? Is there a constitution? Behar said it's a First Amendment guarantee, and we don't seem to have it anymore. House to complain. We are a theocracy right now, Behar insisted. So, and you get this coming from politicians, from the left, the progressive left, from Antifa. You have Lori Lightfoot of Chicago acting like she's above all of us here, and going against Roe v. Wade, of saying, hey, we need a reversal. We're not yielding any ground. And she's putting all her efforts into this when she has massive crime surge going across her counties and her state. And she's going to sit there and say all this stuff. Let's listen to it.
Came forward. She said that Illinois would be an oasis. Let's listen in.
The activist agenda of this conservative majority, where they want to overturn many of the precedents that were premised upon Roe v. Wade's right to privacy. But I got a message for the Justice Thomas and for the Supreme Court. We will not let you take away our rights under any circumstances. These rights are hard fought. These rights are in the spirit of who we are as Americans. We're not going to go back to a day when women do not have bodily autonomy. We're not going to go back to a day where interracial marriage is vilified. We will not go back to a day when gay men in loving each other is treated as a criminal act. And we will not retreat from same-gender marriage. We're not going backwards. So we're going to get people activated, we're going to mobilize, and we're going to fight with all our heart to make sure that the American promise of equal justice under law is real, that it is living and breathing in our country today. So while this decision is angering and frustrating, it's a momentary setback. And we will be even more determined and more adamant to make sure that our rights are respected under law. We're not going backwards. And if the Supreme Court wants to continue to be a politicized organization which delegitimizes itself in the institution, which derobs it of any credibility or legitimacy, so be it. But what I know and what I...
Okay. I think I've had enough of her talking. So it's just all about legitimacy. You know, it goes against them. It's so funny. Whenever something goes against the left, they take to the streets and they get on the airwaves, like you have Lori Lightfoot here and others, and they shout a bunch of nonsense. But then when things go their way, all of a sudden they're all for the Supreme Court. They do everything right. There's nothing wrong with what they say. Any of that stuff. It's amazing how they just are a reed in the wind. At one time they support something like Thomas Jefferson, like today. But then at another time, always racist, slaveholder, you know, had an affair with a slave and had a child and all this other stuff. Look at him, bad him, bad him. We need to remove his monuments. We should get rid of George Washington, all the framers and founders. And they go out and say this 3/5 of a person stuff and gay men aren't going to be able to make love and all this other stuff. It's just the emotions just get so pent up that they shout these crazy ass things. And it's wild. It is so wild. And everybody's just sitting there going, oh, no, they're right. Like, where's the media at on this? You know what I mean? Like stopping going, hey, you know what? Let me just follow up here on what you said. Can you talk about where this right of privacy is within the Constitution? Because if you're going to utilize the 14th Amendment, again, I'm an advocacy of, I want people to have privacy. I'm a very, very private person. But if it's not there, then maybe we should have a conversation about implementing that right, but then not allowing it to be so broad where you can just find other rights within a right that you've had prior justices do and that are still willing to do. Thank God you have people on the court that are somewhat awoken to what happened prior of going, hey, this was wrong. It was bad law. You just don't get to create things. And look, when they created different processes to when you can have an abortion, that is creating law within itself. So saying, hey, first trimester, second and third on when you could do it and when you can't do it, they literally created law and acted like the legislature, which is wild and mind-blowing. And people are all for it. They don't want to talk about those things. They just want to talk about what fits their narrative. Well, you had Justin Trudeau here, Canada, kind of lecturing all of us on women's rights and just rights in general, which is just theatrical and comical in itself. Let's go ahead and watch it.
Today's a difficult day. The judgment coming out of the United States is an attack on women's freedom, and quite frankly, it's an attack on everyone's freedoms and rights. Let me be really, really clear. In Canada, we will always...
and watch more. I want to be really clear. In Canada, where we don't have the right of freedom of speech, where you don't have the right to protect yourself, I'm going to spend the next couple minutes here on lecturing you Americans on rights and what you should and should not allow people to do. Unbelievable. This guy's such a phony, man. Such a phony.
Defend women's rights to choose and continue to work to expand access to the full range of reproductive and health and services across the country. But today...
It's not very reproductive when you're killing children in a scale of millions. And if you look at Canada's abortion laws, I mean, you can literally abort at basically any time. So full-fledged human being, heartbeat, DNA, fingerprints, eyelashes, hair, fingernails, finger toes, everything. Centimeters from coming out of the womb, you can abort that thing in Canada. I shouldn't even call it that thing, that life, that baby, you can abort in Canada. This is how crazy. This guy's totally for it. You're basically looking at somebody that's totally for mass murder and completely fine with it and has the balls to come on TV and lecture Americans about rights.
I think of those generations of women around the world and specifically in the United States who fought so hard to gain rights and continue to fight today to get more and more rights because there's still so much more work to do and are facing this devastating setback. It shows how much standing up and fighting for rights matters every day, that we can't take anything for granted, that we need to continue to stand strong to defend everybody's rights and freedoms.
Okay, well, I'm not going to sit there and put on a whole show of listening to this guy lecture us about rights when he's all up in arms about women having rights, but yet they don't have certain rights there in Canada that women do here in the United States. And actually, women in the United States have vastly more rights here than they do in Canada. But again, he's going to lecture all of us because he knows better. Phony dude, frustrates the hell out of me. And I'm sure he frustrates a lot of you guys, but he's going to sit there and just, kowtow to the people and others. Well, it's not just him going out there in front of the airwaves. It's not just Whoopi Goldberg. It's not just the progressive left, but you have Antifa taking the streets and lighting the American flag on fire. Let's go ahead and watch this together. And for those that are listening, there's a sign with a smoke bomb on top of it that says F the MDPD. So these people are good people, right? If you remember, Joy Behar of The View said these people, they weren't actually a group of people. They were just an ideology, just an idea. While they have their own institutions, they have their own groups, they have their own funding, they have their own pamphlets, which comes from Andy Ngo's book, if you haven't read that, called Unmasked, basically infiltrates Antifa and just exposes everything about them. These people are trained Marxists. Some of them are communists. They hate America, which shows the symbolism of what they were just doing by lighting the American flag on fire. No respect for our creed, no respect for what we're doing here in America. But that's not going to stop the left and Democrat Party working in conjunction with them, while at the same time saying that conservatives and Republicans are working in conjunction with the racist right, which any Republican and conservative does not agree with anything that the racist right does, if that's what you want to call them. Okay. We don't agree with anything they do. But yet when you have Maxine Waters going and saying, hey, take to the streets, find conservatives and Republicans, anybody part of Trump's party, you need to go out and create chaos. You need to go out and confront them, which is why you had all these attacks on Ted Cruz, Sarah Huckabee Sanders in restaurants going after people. You had Antifa and progressive left attacking reporters, attacking conservatives, attacking Trump supporters, attacking Republicans. But time and time again, we spent years watching them burn down cities, attack people, create violent crime, loot places, and we're supposed to just sit there and accept all their opinions and all their conclusions, while at the same time you have them coming out acting like they're holier than thou, that they're above the rest of us, and they want to sit there and tell us how these rulings are supposed to happen without actually not knowing themselves how these opinions came there in the first place. Well, in other crazy news, you had the Biden administration targeting the largest oil producing area in the United States, which is just baffling here because remember, we're told by Karine Jean-Pierre and actually Jen Psaki even before that Joe Biden is doing everything he possibly can to produce more oil. He's going to Saudi Arabia, which we'll get into in a moment because it's freaking hilarious on what's going on with that. But gas prices are only going to get worse, folks. And we were told that he's not going after oil companies, not going to target them, which in fact, that's exactly what he's doing. Because we have the Biden administration is targeting the largest oil producing area in the United States, the Permian Basin located in western Texas and southeastern New Mexico. The EPA, the lovely EPA, always doing great work for Americans here, which is partly the reason why we have such high gas prices, because they always want to put their foot in the freaking the mud itself, is considering labeling parts of the Permian Basin as violating the ozone standards set by the federal government. Quote, the EPA is now considering a discretionary redesignation for portions of these counties in New Mexico and Texas for the 2015 Ozone Clean Air Act, Section 107. Based on current monitoring data and other air quality factors, the Biden administration wrote, if the EPA succeeds in its plans, new permitting requirements and scrutiny of drilling operations will ensue. Well, isn't this interesting? Because didn't we just have the press, not the press secretary itself, but during a press briefing, you had the energy secretary coming out and saying, hey, we're not going to put in new permitting and requirements and regulations on these companies. Let's go ahead and watch this together.
Issues of some of these refiners or some of these oil producers. What guarantee can the administration give them as you're asking them to increase production, that more regulation as you pursue that transition isn't coming down the pipe for them? As you're asking them to
we're asking them to increase supply. We're not telling them we're going to increase regulation on them. We are hopeful that they will see the opportunity of investing as well in this clean energy future. In fact, a number of these refineries have transitioned to biofuels, and that's good. We want to see them be part of this clean energy future as well. So we want to build more energy. We want to build clean energy, and we know that ultimately that's where our security will lie.
So there you have it. The Energy Secretary coming out and saying, hey, we're not going to put in new regulations. We're not going to stop them from producing oil. But at the same time, that's exactly what the EPA is doing under the Biden administration. Quote, the possible regulatory actions added yet another element of uncertainty to the oil industry, which is already facing an unknown future while being chastised for not investing more to produce more, whether that's refining or drilling. And she's going, oh, well, we want them to produce. We're doing everything we can on our end to help them. They got 9,000 permits, over 9,100, and they're just not producing oil. They're just not doing it. So they want to have a war with the oil companies when everything that they say is contradicted by what the actual oil companies are doing themselves. Quote, creating uncertainty on permitting and inserting unnecessary regulatory barriers will only negatively impact the production necessary to meet the needs of consumers. This comes from the president of Texas Oil and Gas Association, which doesn't take a brain surgeon to kind of think and having those kind of thoughts that this is going to negatively impact the production within itself. When you create uncertainty in the market and you're going after oil companies, do you think that they're going to want to drill more? Do you think they're going to want to go out of their way to do certain things for an administration that wants to constantly go after them, that basically wants to absolve them from being on the face of the planet because they don't like fossil fuels? They want everything to be wind and solar. I mean, hell, you don't have to look too far other than AOC's Green New Deal on what she would like to do. And that's not probably too far off than what the Biden administration wants to do as well. In July, the Permian Basin will produce roughly 60% of the oils per day, or barrels of oil per day, from the 7 most prolific U.S. basins, according to the Energy Information Administration. Do you think that'll have a little bit of an impact when you start reducing this area? I would say so, yeah. But they're going to come out. I would imagine this week you'll have Peter Doocy or somebody come out and question Karine Jean-Pierre on this, and she'll spin it in some way, shape, or form that somehow Joe Biden is doing yeoman's work of creating more oil somehow, while at the same time putting more regulations and shutting down the Keystone Pipeline, while putting in other regulations as well in Texas, while also shutting down oil refineries a couple weeks ago. All these things are taking place while at the same time saying, oh, this is what we're doing. This is how we're helping the American people out. Which is odd because what happened over the weekend was Biden top aide interrupts as Macron spills bad news about oil crisis in front of reporters. So you have President Biden's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, on Monday, stepped in to interrupt French President Emmanuel Macron as he broke bad news to Biden, with journalists feet away about attempts to get Arab nations to produce more oil to lower record gas prices. So if you recall, Joe Biden wants to not increase domestic oil productions. He would rather buy it from other countries, the Arab countries, Arab nations. And this is what he's like banking on. He's basically pleading with them. There's funny even cartoons and drawings out there of him pleading with these Arab nations to produce more oil. There's just one problem. They can't. They're basically saying, hey, we're at max capacity here. So it says, quote, maybe we should just step inside because of the cameras, Sullivan said, monitoring to journalists covering the G7 summit in Germany. It's unclear if Sullivan was concerned about any particular nugget of news leaking to journalists, but some of Macron's words were clearly audible. Quote, I had a call with MBZ, Macron told Biden, referring to the leader of the United Arab Emirates, Mohammed bin, I can't even pronounce that guy's name, I'm not going to try. It's an unbelievable long name. Quote, he told me 2 things. I'm at maximum production capacity. This is what he claims. And then he said the Saudis can increase by 150,000 barrels per day, maybe a little bit more, but they don't have huge capacity before 6 months' time. So they're trying to find oil now. They can't do it. Biden himself is trying to figure all this out, which is astonishing, right? You have a guy that's been in office for 40 plus years and he doesn't know how anything works. That tells you something about politicians in general, whether it's Republican or Democrat. These people suck at the teeth of the government, at the taxpayer dollar consistently for years on end, and they don't have a clue. And it makes you wonder what the hell they're doing. They're not doing anything, which is why we need some of these people out of office. And way Roe v. Wade is going, and way oil industry is going here, you're going to have freaking Nancy Pelosi out. And thank God, I apologize if she's coming from our home state, because our home state produces a bunch of idiots. Nancy Pelosi, you have Barbara Boxer, you have Kamala Harris as the vice president now. All folks are coming from freaking California. You got a bunch of nutsos. So I feel some sense of an apology is due, because you have people that I live with in this state voting for these same knuckleheads in there, and they can't figure out why everything's going to crap. So the news means that Biden's visit to Saudi Arabia next month may fail to woo the oil-rich Arab states to help alleviate a spike in gas prices associated with Russia's 4-month-old invasion of Ukraine. So even you have the New York Post rubbing the feet and shoulders of Joe Biden, associating the gas prices with Russia's 4-month-old invasion, but is not going to talk about the multi-dollar increase that he had before Russia ever invaded Ukraine in the first place. Matter of fact, there was a massive increase right at the start of Russia's invasion of Ukraine before a lot of the sanctions were put in place, before a lot of things happened. So you're looking, again, maybe a $2 to $3 increase just from Joe Biden himself, but they don't want to do that. They don't want to expose that because, again, they're just with the Democrat Party. They're with the progressive left. You probably have a progressive left writing this that, again, wants to sit there and be in bed with somebody that's sitting there running this country into the ground. And it must drive y'all nuts, because I know it does myself, sitting here and reading this stuff and not exposing the truth here through this article of what Joe Biden has actually done to economy, was actually done with gas prices and all those things. Just wants to sit there and run Jen Psaki's narrative and Karine Jean-Pierre's and Joe Biden and his whole administration that it's all Putin's fault. It's all Putin's fault, folks. Well, it's not just Joe Biden running the economy in the ground in terms of gas prices. He still has not got the illegal immigration under control. He is doing something that's an overreach of the executive branch as far as I have ever seen, maybe. And in effect, basically giving amnesty to tens of thousands of illegal immigration cases through basically getting rid of cases at the southern border. This is wild, folks. President Joe Biden's administration is forcing federal prosecutors to drop tens of thousands of cases against illegal immigrants, creating a sort of de facto amnesty that could permit up to 1 million people to seek permanent legal status in the United States by 2024. Effectively just cutting hundreds of thousands of people who took their test, who paid the money, who've been waiting in line for years. Joe Biden's just like, forget it. Just get rid of their cases. Allow them to start their legal status. We're good to go here. Anything that's before a certain time, just go ahead and get rid of. And this comes from a whistleblower from the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. A federal prosecutor told the Washington Examiner Friday that Biden administration officials have instructed ICE prosecutors to deal with a backlog of 2 million immigration cases by throwing out cases from before the November 2020 election. In an April 14 virtual meeting, ICE principal legal advisor laid out the Biden administration's policy to the more than 1,200 ICE prosecutors handling cases against illegal immigrants, the Examiner reported. She told them only to prosecute cases against migrants identified as national security or public safety threats, or those who had crossed the border illegally after November 1st, 2020. Doyle instructed the prosecutors were to use their discretion to drop all other cases. So this is all coming out while you have illegal immigrants pouring across the border every single day. We're talking somewhere upwards around 6,000 to 8,000. You had a 15,000 to 20,000 person caravan coming from South America right up there to the U.S. southern border. Joe Biden's welcoming them with open arms. And what kind of message is this sending now to people in those southern countries that believe Joe Biden made a promise to them, and a promise that he has to keep for them, even though they're not American citizens? Those promises that the president makes is not supposed to be for other countries necessarily. Most of those promises are supposed to be for your own citizens. Now, I understand there's a fact of promising your allies certain things because, again, they're their allies. You sign certain obligations for them and to them. But you're going to sit there and promise other people that don't even pay into the system that you're going to just grant them certain freedoms and certain amnesty to become U.S. citizens while you're going to screw over everybody else that's in line. It's freaking frustrating. Well, we have Sav Says here from the border of Yuma, or in Yuma, right there at the border, following the border crisis that's taking place and just documenting everything that's going on. Let's go ahead and take a clip here.
Now, this is the American side of the border wall, and right behind me are all of the illegals coming from the Mexican side of the wall. We already have a group being processed right in front of me of about 25 people, and people continue to pour across the border. It's almost 1 a.m. here, and we have seen nonstop activity since we've arrived about an hour ago. So this is the current scene.
If you're listening to this, what we were looking at was people coming just right around the wall. There was a wide opening, just making their way around. They have phones out. They're smiling. They're laughing. They're taking photos and selfies of themselves as they're getting here illegally. And then they're about to go through a process of paperwork with masks on. They're about to be bussed to Lord knows who where, whether that's an immigration facility or they're going and being put into the interior of the United States, which we've done a lot of talking about, where Joe Biden's basically flying them under the night into different areas of America. We also obviously have Greg Abbott of Texas and Senator Ted Cruz busting into Washington, D.C. That was supposed to be like, hey, you know what? Screw you. If you guys really want to allow this to happen, then we'll just bust them to Washington, D.C. right there in the foot of the Capitol and let you guys deal with it. The only issue is somehow somebody's funding these people and then sending them to other places. There was a picture that showed where all these illegal immigrants are going once they're basically in the United States, and they're all going to Florida, and Ron DeSantis is pissed about it. When he saw the graph of where they're all going and all of them are being headed to Florida, he was pissed. And basically he's saying, hey, you know what? I'm allowing my own authority here, my own basically officers, my own guard here in the state of Florida to basically get rid of them. And he told Texas to do the exact same thing. He's basically saying, look, if the federal government does not want to do what it's supposed to do, if the executive branch doesn't want to execute the laws of building the border wall, protecting our borders, deporting people when they're supposed to, you got to take it upon yourself and just do it yourself. Screw them. If they don't want to do it, then you do it yourself. And that's basically the advice to Texas and Governor Greg Abbott. And he said, if you don't have the resources and you need help, let me know and I'll send resources and I'll help you. So we don't have an update on that as of yet, but that's what's going on at the U.S.-Mexico border. Thousands of people are pouring across every single day. And now you might have an effect of 1 million people getting amnesty that have cases before a certain period of November in 2020. So there you have it, folks. Joe Biden, the progressive left, honestly, in my opinion, are destroying this country from the inside out. And I think the Democrat Party is starting to merge more and more with that progressive left. And I think when you have Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, kind of these old politicians out of office, the Democrat Party will elect, in my opinion, more progressive leftists into office that's going to fit their narrative, that are going to be more similar to what you're hearing on The View, because you got a lot of young women, a lot of young men, a lot of people that are on the left side of the aisle, even the Democrat Party, that are watching these outlets and just believing everything they're saying whole cloth. Like, oh, they don't have a brain. They just want to sit there and absorb this stuff rather than saying, oh, I'm not sure if I actually agree with that point that she made. That's a really asinine thing to say, that they're going to just sit there and use their religious viewpoints and making a certain opinion by turning over Roe v. Wade with not having really much context in what the decision was to come to that conclusion. I can understand you can manipulate some things and you already have your certain narratives that want to bias you towards that viewpoint. But when you look at what was already set as precedents before, and you're going to sit there and try to attach it to religion without actually acknowledging that they just made certain laws out of whole cloth, they just came out of thin air, and they themselves that created those said that you can't find them anywhere else, that you're not actually going to find the right to privacy, you're not going to find the right to marital privacy, you're not going to find zone of privacy, you're not going to find right to abortion, you're not going to find women's rights, those specific words, those types of things, like women's right to abortion, to be more specific in that. You're not going to find those in the Constitution. And if you want to find those, then they need to be created. It's not up to the Supreme Court to create those things. You have a whole branch of government that could enact those and put those into place if that's what the people want. But rather than putting it at a federal level, what's tend to be done through American history, and rightfully so, through the Federalist Papers and through the creation from the framers of this country, having the states themselves be able to decide on those laws. That way you can elect the people that you want to enact the laws that you want, which is why Roe v. Wade should have never been left up to the federal courts or the Supreme Court within itself. It should have been left to the states, and that's what it was for many, many years. Heck, since the foundation, over 176 years in this country before Roe ended up being established through a bunch of stuff that we've already covered here. And lastly, again, Joe Biden still destroying this country in terms of oil. This, in my opinion, this whole oil thing is on purpose. It's similar to illegal immigration. There's no way in hell, and maybe I'm giving him too much respect here, but in my opinion, there's no way in hell this guy can have this many problems without it being an intentional act, if that makes sense. You're a year and a half and you can't figure out anything. You can't get the National Guard down there. You can't build the border. You can't go down there yourself in a year and a half. You can't do any of this. And you're going to tell me that it's by accident, that, I can't get it under control. It's just a challenge. And then gas prices, you're going to tell me that, while at the same time you want to get rid of fossil fuel and that's what you campaigned on, you're going to try and not increase domestic oil production, but say that you're doing everything you can to increase oil production, that you're going to reach out to Saudi Arabia and these Arab nations and the Emirates and all these other places rather than just increasing the oil here because we know that we have it. But yet you're going to do everything you can. It's just, to me, it's an act. It's phony. It's very similar to how Justin Trudeau got up there and kind of lectured us about rights. Yet these Democrats, these progressive left from other countries, including America, banding together to lie to the American people, to lecture us, to make it seem like they're holier than thou, when they're actively destroying this country from the inside out. And they're working in conjunction with people that want to burn the American flag while protesting. Bunch of craziness, folks, but that's what we have here today from the Bald Brad Show. Again, if you're on YouTube, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. Leave us a comment down below on anything that we covered and what you think about all the shenanigans from the Biden administration. If you're over at Rumble, again, leave me a comment down below. If you're on Apple, Spotify, or any of the podcast sources, go ahead and leave us a nice review. Your help would greatly appreciate it. And folks, I will see you here tomorrow on the Bald Brad Show.